My world was a tapestry of whispers and shadows. For as long as I could remember, I had lived on the fringes of the Silverfang pack, an omega whose presence was noted only as a slight disturbance in the air, a fleeting scent of moonlight and wild sage that was quickly dismissed. I am Elara. My status was not just low. It was a carefully maintained secret, the elders, with their grim faces and pitying eyes, had warned me since childhood. Do not draw his attention, Elara. Do not let him see you. The him needed no name. It was always Kaelen, the giant Alpha King, the sovereign of all surrounding territories, whose power was as vast and untamed as the northern mountains. Today was the blood moon gathering where all pack members, from the highest beta to the lowest omega, presented themselves to the king. It was a display of strength, loyalty, and hierarchy. I kept my hood drawn low, my eyes fixed on the worn leather of my boots as I stood in the very last row of the omega line. The air thrummed with potent alpha energy, a mix of pine iron and storm wind that made my head swim. I focused on shrinking myself, on making my heart beat as quiet as a mouse's. I could feel him before I saw him. A seismic shift in the atmosphere, a pressure that made my knees tremble. I dared a glance upwards, my breath catching in my throat. Kaelen was not just tall, he was a monument of a man. Shoulders broad enough to block the sun. His hair the color of raven wings. And his eyes, even from this distance, they glinted like shards of Arctic ice. He moved down the lines with a predatory grace, acknowledging his betas with a nod, ignoring most with a dispassionate gaze that was colder than outright disdain. His expression was one of profound, bone-deep boredom. The line inched forward. I could hear the rustle of fine cloth, the clink of ceremonial armor. I repeated the elder's words in my mind like a prayer. Unseen, unnoticed, unimportant. The scent of roasting meat and spiced wine from the feast meant for the elites wafted down. A cruel reminder of my place, my stomach growled softly, and I clenched my fist nails biting into my palms. Focus, Elara, become part of the ground. A commotion broke out near the front. A young, brash alpha from a minor pack had challenged a Silverfang warrior. It was a foolish breach of protocol. Kaelen didn't even turn his head. He merely lifted a hand, a flick of his wrist. An invisible force will made manifest, slammed the challenger to the earth, pinning him like a butterfly to a board. The king's voice, when it came, was a low rumble that vibrated in my very bones. Remove him, that was all. Two words that held the finality of a tomb door closing. The crowd fell into a deeper, terrified silence. The procession resumed. My turn was approaching. 5 omegas ahead, then 4, my unique scent, which I struggled to cloak with common herbs, felt suddenly loud, a screaming beacon in the solemn quiet. 3, 2, 1, I stood before the dais. Head bowed so low, I saw only the imposing scuff of his boots. I could feel the weight of his gaze upon my hood. The seconds stretched into an eternity. The icy breeze stilled. The murmurs of the crowd died a sudden death. I heard a sharp, almost imperceptible intake of breath from above me. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird trying to escape its cage. No, 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 no. This isn't happening. He's moving on. He has to move on. But he didn't. His boot shifted, turning fully toward me. A large, calloused hand entered my downcast vision. He didn't touch me, he simply gestured. A silent command that brooked no disobedience. Look up. The command was quiet meat for my ears only. But it held the power of a shouted decree, trembling. Every instinct screaming to flee. I slowly raised my head and pushed back my hood. The fading sunlight caught my hair, the unusual silver-white strands that marked me as different. My ice the color of violets after rain. Met his glacial blue ones, the world vanished. The crowds, the noise, the fear, all melted away in his eyes. I didn't see the cold boredom from moments before. I saw a cataclysm, a recognition so deep and startling, it mirrored the shock lancing through me. It was as if he was seeing a ghost, a legend. A treasure he thought forever lost, his pupils dilated. And for a fleeting moment, the mighty Alpha King looked unmoored. His voice, when he spoke again, was different. The frost was still there, but beneath it ran a current of something raw and bewildered. "What is your name?" The entire clearing was listening, holding its breath. I licked my dry lips, my voice a fragile thread of sound. "Elara." He repeated it, the name a rough caress on his tongue. "Elara," then louder. His voice rolling over the assembled packs with the force of a royal decree. "This Omega is under the direct protection of the crown. From this moment, her safety is the safety of the realm. Any who look upon her with harm, look upon me." The gasps that rippled through the crowd were like a tidal wave. Whispers exploded. I stood frozen, the center of a storm I didn't understand. His gaze never left mine, intense and searching. He had ignored everyone, he had claimed no one until now. Until me, and as his words sank in a single, terrifying thought echoed in the new silence of my mind. The shadows that had been my shelter were gone. What had just begun? The king's pronouncement didn't feel like a rescue. It felt like an earthquake before I could process his words. Two of his personal guards, their faces impassive masks of duty, were at my sides. They didn't touch me, but their presence was an unbreakable wall. "Come with us." "Miss Elara," one said, his tone respectful, yet leaving no room for question. I was led away from the Omega lines, away from the familiar, scornful faces, and into the heart of the Silverfang stronghold, the king's own citadel. The stone corridors were vast and cold, echoing with the footsteps of important people who glanced at me with naked curiosity and poorly concealed envy. I was taken to a suite of rooms that took my breath away. It was larger than the entire Omega dormitory. A large window overlooked the misty forests, and a fire crackled in a hearth carved from moonstone. The bed was piled with furs softer than cloud. It was a gilded cage, beautiful and utterly isolating. A servanta, gentle-faced beta woman named Liana, was assigned to me. "The king has requested your presence at the high table for the evening feast," she informed, mellowing out a gown of deep blue silk. It was a color for alphas or high-ranking betas. Not for omegas. "I can't wear this, I can't go there. It's not my place." My protest was weak, the habit of a lifetime. Liana simply smiled kindly. "Your place is now wherever the king says it is, my lady." The title "lady" struck me as a mockery. But her eyes held no mockery, only a quiet awe. That evening, clad in the foreign silkai, was escorted to the great hall. The roar of conversation died as I entered on the arm of a stoic guard. Hundreds of eyes burned into me. I felt the heat of their stares, the confusion, jealousy, the outright hostility from some of the highborn Omegas who had dreamed of catching the king's eye. I was seated not at the distant Omega benches, but at the high tableone seat away from Kaelen himself. The empty chair between us felt like a chasm. He arrived last, his entrance commanding an instant reverent silence. He took his seat at the head of the table, his gaze sweeping the hall before settling briefly on me. A simple glance, but it felt like a brand. He said nothing to me throughout the meal. He engaged in terse conversation with his war council. discussing border tensions with the rival Shadowclaw pack. Yet I was acutely aware of his attention. Every time I shifted in my Sethai's eyes flickered toward me. When a boisterous beta laughed too loudly on my other side. A low, almost inaudible growl emanated from the king. And the beta instantly quieted after the feast. As I was hurriedly retreating to the sanctuary of my rooms, his voice stopped me in the arched doorway of the hall. Elara, I turned, he stood alone now. The firelight casting dramatic shadows across the hard planes of his face. Walk with me in the West Garden, tomorrow at dawn. It was not a request, my mouth went dry. Why, my king? His icy eyes held mine, because I have questions. And you are an answer to a question I have not yet learned to ask. He turned and left, leaving me more confused and unsettled than ever. That night, sleep was a stranger. The soft bed felt like a trap. The elder's warnings screamed in my memory. What did he see in me? What did he want, and what legacy? As the old stories hidden under my floorboard hinted, was I supposedly meant to restore the legacy my mother, before she disappeared, whispered of in lullabies about a lost line of keepers, guardians of an ancient harmony between all wolves. A legacy that had gotten her killed, and now, the most dangerous wolf of all was looking directly at me. Dawn arrived dressed in shades of gray and silver. Liana helped me into a simpluorm woolen dress, her hands fluttering with a nervous energy. The West Garden is his private sanctuary, she whispered. No one is ever invited there. That did nothing to calm the fluttering in my stomach. I walked the deserted corridors, the citadel sleeping around me. The garden was not a flowered paradise but a wild, structured piece of the forest brought within the walls. Ancient trees stood sentinel, their leaves dripping with dew, and a narrow path of crushed quartz wound between ferns and silent pools. He was already there, standing by a pool so still it perfectly mirrored the brooding sky. He looked less like a king and more like a warrior at rest, though the power coiled in his frame was unmistakable. He didn't turn as I approached. My footsteps silent on the soft path, you came. He stated it as a fact. I was commanded to, my king. Finally, he turned, in the soft morning light. His features seemed less harsh. Though his eyes were just as penetrating, dropped the title. Here it is just Kaelen. The offer was staggering. Tell me of your family, your mother. The directness shocked me. I wrapped my arms around myself. She died when I was young. I have no family. You have a scent, Elara, moonlight and wild sage. And something else, something old. A scent that hasn't been smelled in these lands for a generation. It is the scent of the Lunacine line. The word struck me like a physical blow. The name from the hidden stories. The lost line of royal omegas, said to be blessed by the moon itself, who could heal not just bodies, but the very bonds between wolves. Who could sense the truth in any heart? They were the counterbalance to the alpha's raw power. The nurturers of peace, they were said to be extinct, hunted to oblivion by those who feared their unifying influence. You're mistaken, that line is a myth, a fairy tale for pups. My voice trembled. Kaelen took a step closer, not threatening but intense. Is it, then when you stood before meted the constant raging storm inside me, quiet. For the first time in decades, I heard silence. I felt a sense of, he struggled for the word, rightness. He looked away. A flicker of vulnerability in the set of his jaw. My reign is one of strength. I have kept the pack safe through war and winter. But it is a fragile piece held together by fear of me. Not by true unity, the Shadowclaw threat grows. Division festers within my own council. I am a sword, Elara. A shield, but I cannot weave a broken pack back together. He was confessing his own limitations. The mighty Alpha King, I looked at him, truly looked. Behind the icy authority, I saw the weight of a crown that was also a cage. The loneliness of absolute power, and I felt it, a strange, instinctive pull to soothe that ache to calm that storm. It wasn't submission, it was completion. The old stories whispered in my blood. The alpha's strength guards the body of the pack. The lunasine's spirit guards its heart. I don't know how to be what you think I am, I whispered. Truthfully, neither do I, he admitted. His gaze returning to me softer now, but we will learn. Together, your legacy is not lost, Elara, it is dormant. And it is the key to saving everything. He reached out. Not to touch me, but to offer his hand palm up. An invitation, not a command. Will you walk with me? In that moment in the hushy-do kissed garden, my fear didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else, a purpose. I placed my hand small and pale just above his palm. Not touching but accepting the covenant. The first fragile thread of a bond not of dominance, but of alliance you was spun in the silence between our hands. The unseen Omega was unseen no more. And a dangerous, beautiful journey had truly begun. My days fell into a new rhythm. One of quiet tension and startling discoveries. I was a ghost haunting the halls of power. A puzzle piece that didn't fit the board. My lessons began not with politics or pack law, but with memory. Kaelen had provided me with scrolls. Ancient texts from the Citadel's deepest archives. Delivered by a stern but not unkind librarian named Alden. The scent of old parchment and dust became my constant companion. The words on those pages were more than history. They were an echo of my own blood. They spoke of the Lunasine Omgasnot as subservient mates, but as revered advisorshilers of the soul. The bridge between the Alpha's will and the Pack's heart. They were the keepers of the Moon's accord. A sacred bond that ensured balance, my mother's lullabies. The fragments I'd clung to were verses from their old rituals. Reading them felt like coming home to a place I'd never known. Yet for every moment of clarity, there was an hour of scrutiny. The Alpha King's council watched me. I felt their gazes during the rare times I was in the main hall, Beta Commander Rylan. With his calculating eyes that saw everything as a strategic asset. The elderly but sharp-tongued Elder Moira, who viewed any change as a threat to tradition. Their suspicion was a cold wall, I was an anomaly. A low-born Omega, elevated beyond reason. And it unsettled the order they cherished. It was during one of my solitary walks in the lesser-used eastern courtyard that I felt it for the first time, a pull. Not towards Kaelen but towards the land itself, a faint, silvery thrum beneath my feet like a dormant heartbeat. It led me to a forgotten corner, where a wall was overgrown with thick ivy. On impulse, I pushed the vines aside. Beneath them was not stone but ancient. Carved wood, a sealed door. Its surface etched with phases of the moon. The symbol of the Lunasine. My own pulse quickened to match the hidden rhythm. I pressed my palm against the cold, damp wood. A shock, gentle but electric, traveled up my arm. A lock within the door clicked, not a sound heard by the ear, but felt in the spirit. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing darkness and the smell of undisturbed earth and old magic. I should have gone for help, I should have told Kaelen. But this felt private, a secret between me and the ghost of my lineage. I took a torch from a sconce and stepped inside. It was a small, circular chamber, a sanctuary. The walls were painted with faded murals depicting Omegas not serving, but leading ceremonies under a full moon. their hands extended as silver light wove between wolves of all ranks. Connecting them, at the room's center was a simple stone pedestal, and on it rested a single, luminous object, a crescent moon pendant made of a pearlescent stone that glowed with its own soft light. As I reached for it, a wave of emotion that was not my own washed over me, a mother's love. A fierce protectiveness, a profound sorrow. My mother's face clearer than in any memory. Flashed before my eyes, this was hers. She had hidden it here, the pendant grew warm in my hand. And a vision sharp and painful pierced my mind, my mother. Terrified, whispering the lullaby as she hid this very amulet. Before a shadow fell over her, a shadow that smelled of cold metal and ambition. A scent I vaguely recognized but could not place. The vision shattered, leaving me gasping, clutching the pendant to my chest. The legacy was not just stories, it was real. And her loss was not an accident, it was a crime. And the perpetrator might still be here in these very halls, watching the last lunacine with hungry eyes. Carrying the weight of the pendant, and the vision felt like holding a live coal. I hid the amulet beneath my clothes, its warmth a constant, secret reassurance against my skin. But the secret felt too big to hold alone. The memory of that unfamiliar, ambitious scent from the vision haunted me. It lingered at the edges of my awareness. A ghost in the Citadel's scentscape. My next audience with Kaelen was in his war room, a place of maps and grim purpose. He was discussing the increased Shadowclaw raids on the northern border with Commander Rylan and Elder Mora. I was there to observe, a silent witness to the machinations of power. They test us. My king, Rylan said, his finger stabbing a map. Small, targeted strikes, they probe for weakness. We must retaliate with overwhelming force. Burn their outposts, show them the cost of defiance. And drive every neutral pack into their arms in the process. Elder Moira counter-read, her voice dry. Brute strength solves nothing but the immediate itch. We must outmaneuver them politically, isolate them. Kaelen listened, his expression granite. His eyes flicked to me, standing quietly by the window. You are both describing tools, not a solution. One is a hammer, the other a scalpel. We lack the hand that knows when to use which. There it was again. His quiet acknowledgement of a missing piece. His gaze lingered on me, as if hoping I might suddenly speak with the wisdom of my ancestors. It was then that I caught it, as Rylan leaned forward, arguing for his swift strikia shift in the air. The scent from my vision, cold metal ruthless ambition, carefully masked under the smell of oiled leather and pine. It was him, Commander Rylan. The realization was a ice water in my veins, this man. The king's trusted right-hand, his chief strategist, was connected to my mother's disappearance. My reaction was a tiny, involuntary gasp. Kaelin's head snapped toward me. Ryland's eyes followed, sharp and assessing. Does the Omega have something to add? He asked, a polite veneer over clear disdain. Or perhaps the tension of strategy is too much for her delicate nature. The condescension sparked a fire in me. The pendant against my chest grew warmer. I met Ryland's gaze. And for a moment I didn't see a powerful commander. I saw the shadow from my vision. I know nothing of war. Commander, I said, me voice surprisingly steady. But I know that a house divided cannot stand. The solution isn't just about the enemy outside. It's about the trust within. I was parroting the principles from the scrolls. But they felt true. Kaelin's eyes narrowed, not at me, but at Ryland's reaction. The commander's smile was thin, taut. Wise words from the archives, no doubt. But trust does not stop a claw at your throat, no. Kaelen interrupted. His voice a low rumble that silenced the room. But it might prevent the claw from being wielded by someone you call brother. He was looking directly at Rylan now. A silent challenge passing between them. He had sensed the undercurrent. The seed of doubt was planted after the council. Kaelen dismissed the others but motioned for me to stay. The door closed, leaving us in the quiet of the room. "What did you see?" he asked without preamble. I found something, a hidden chamber my mother s. I drew the pendant from beneath my tunic. Its soft glow illuminated the space between us. Kaelin's breath caught, and when Rylan spoke, I remembered. The one who chased my mother, who wanted to erase our line, it carried his scent. The scent of ambition without loyalty. Kaelen did not explode in anger. He went very, very still. The storm in him was not raging, but freezing into a deadly glacier. Rylan has been with me since we were youths. He has fought at my side 100 times. The pain of potential betrayal etched lines around his eyes. If this is true, the division is deeper than I feared. And more dangerous, he looked from the pendant to my face. You are in greater peril than I imagined. He will see you as the final obstacle. What do we do? I whispered. We use the truth as a weapon, Kaelen said, his jaw set. But we must be sure. You must learn to use your legacy, Elara. Not just remember it, you must learn to see the bonds. To sense the truth in the heart, as the scrolls say. When you can show me, show the pack, the fracture not just in our borders, but in our council, then we can act. He placed a hand over mine that held the pendant. His touch was careful, grounding. You are not alone in this fight. Your legacy is my kingdom's hope. I will be your shield as you learn to be our compass. The following weeks were a dual education, by day. Under Alden, the librarian's guidance, I studied the Lunacine practices, meditations to still the mind, exercises to extend one's awareness beyond the physical body, to feel the emotional tapestry of the pack. It was subtle, exhausting work. I felt like a child learning to hear a new frequency of sound. By night, in the secrecy of my chambers or the dawn garden with Kaelen, I practiced. He was my reluctant test subject. What do you sense from me now? He would ask. Standing across from me, his formidable presence, a wall of controlled energy. At first, it was just a blur of power, a roaring waterfall of will and responsibility. But as I learned to calm my own spirit, to listen with something other than my ears, impressions began to form. Frustration, I murmured one evening, my eyes closed. But not with me, with the situation. A deep worry, like a stone in your chest. And beneath it, loneliness, a vast, quiet space. I opened my eyes, worried I had overstepped. He was staring at me, a look of stunned vulnerability on his face, before he schooled it back to neutrality. Accurate was all he said, but his voice was thick. No one had perceived him so clearly in years, perhaps ever. The true test came during a public audience. Kaelen was hearing disputes between pack members, a land boundary issue between two farmers. The facts were convoluted, both men vehement, the council. Including Rylan looked on with bored impatience. Ready for a quick, arbitrary judgment to move on to more important matters. Kaelen listened, then surprised everyone. Elara. Approach, a murmur ran through the room. I walked forward on legs of jelly, feeling every eye upon me. He gestured for me to stand beside his throne. Tell me what you perceive. This was not a private lesson. This was a public unveiling. I took a deep centering breath, my fingers finding the hidden pendant. I looked at the first farmer, pouring all my focus into him. I let the noise of the room fade. Seeking the thread of his truth, I saw not facts, but feelings, a genuine burning sense of injustice, a fear for his family's livelihood, but also a flicker of guilt. He was exaggerating his claim. I turned to the second man. His anger was a hot, aggressive blaze, but underneath it was a cold, calculating greed. He knew the land wasn't fully his, but he saw weakness and aimed to exploit it. I turned to Kaelen and spoke softly, but the quiet room carried my words. The first speaks from a place of perceived loss and fear, though he clouds part of the truth. The second speaks from a place of opportunity and greed, and his anger is a weapon. I met each farmer's eyes in turn. To the first, you fear for your children. Do not let that fear make you dishonest. And to the second, you seek to enrich yourself. Do not let that desire poison your pack spirit. The room was utterly silent. The farmers gaped, their masks of indignation slipping into shock. They hadn't spoken of children or personal desires. Kaelen then gave his judgment, a Solomonic decision that split the difference but assigned the larger share to the first farmer, with a stipulation for shared water rights. Both men, humbled and seen in a way that transcended the law, accepted it without a word of protest. As I stepped back, I caught Ryland's eye. His expression was unreadable, but the cold, metallic scent of his ambition spiked sharp and alarmed. He understood now what I was becoming. I was no longer just a curious pet of the king. I was a power that could see past lies and manipulate the hearts of men. A power that could expose him, and in that moment, I also felt something new from Kaelen. A wave of warmth and fierce pride that washed over my nascent senses. It wasn't possession, it was recognition. I had woven my first thread of true peace not through force, but through clarity. The journey was no longer just about survival or reclaiming a legacy. It was about changing the very fabric of our world. And the most dangerous wolf in the forest had just realized I was not a lamb, but a nascent force of nature. The success of the audience chamber was a double-edged sword. Whispers of the moon-touched Omega spread through the citadel like wildfire, morphing with each telling. Some spoke of me with awe, a sign of returning blessings. Others, fueled by fear and Ryland's subtle insinuations, called it witchcraft, a dangerous manipulation of the king's mind. My world, which had expanded from the Omega quarters to the royal wing, now felt like it was closing in again, this time under a microscope of heightened scrutiny. Kaelen, however, seemed more resolved than ever. Our dawn meetings continued. Shifting from lessons to strategy, Rylan is moving. He told me one morning, his voice a low growl that resonated in the quiet garden. He's been quietly reassigning loyal guards to remote posts, consolidating his own followers in key positions. He's preparing for a challenge, but he's too clever to make it direct. He will attack the pack's faith in its leadership first. And I am the symbol of that leadership now, I concluded, the weight of it settling on my shoulders. The pendant felt warm, a constant companion. He will try to discredit me. He already is, Kaelen confirmed. The next move will be public, we must be ready. It came during the blessing of the wells, a traditional ceremony to honor the coming spring and ensure clean water for the pack. It was a ritual, usually led by the eldest elders, but this year, by Kaelen's unprecedented decree, I was to participate, representing the restored harmony between the pack and its ancient spirits. It was a bold, provocative move. We were forcing Ryland's hand. The entire pack gathered around the central well in the main courtyard. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a stark contrast to the bright spring sun. I stood beside Elder Moira, who shot me a look that was more assessing than hostile. Rylan stood at the front of the crowd of warriors, his expression one of solemn duty. The ceremony proceeded. Elders chanted. Offerings of herbs and purified salt were made. Then, it was my turn to pour the ceremonial vial of moon-blessed water, water I had prepared myself in solitude, into the well. As I stepped forward, vial in hand, a commotion erupted from the back of the crowd. A young Omega woman, her face pale with terror, was being dragged forward by two of Ryland's guards. "My king," one guard shouted. "We found this hidden in the Omega's quarters." He held aloft a small, dark clay jar. "Wolfsbane, crushed and ready to mix. And we have witness who says they saw her near the well house last night." The crowd erupted in gasps and cries. Wolfsbane was a deadly poison to our kind. The accusation was not just against me. It was an accusation of attempted mass murder. A betrayal of the most sacred trust, the young Omega. A girl named Sella, I vaguely recognized, was sobbing, claiming she knew nothing, that the jar wasn't hers. My eyes flew to Rylan. His face was a mask of grim satisfaction. This was his play. Not to attack me directly, but to frame me. To make me a monster in the eyes of the pack, thus destroying Kaelen's credibility for protecting me. The cold, metallic scent of his triumph was a foul cloud in the air. Kaelen's rage was a palpable wave, but he held it. A king frozen in a moment of crisis, all eyes swung to me. The vial of blessing water felt like poison in my hand. Then the warmth at my chest surged. The lunacine pendant pulsed and a claritical and sharp. Cut through my panic, I looked at the sobbing Sella, and then at the guard holding the jar. I closed my eyes for a second, reaching out with the new sense I had been cultivating. From Sella, I felt only a whirlwind of confusion and raw, undiluted terror, no guilt, no malice. From the guard, a slick, nervous anticipation. I opened my eyes and spoke, my voice carrying not with royal command but with a strange, resonant certainty that stilled the crowd. "The poison is not in the jar." Silence fell. Ryland sneered. "A desperate lie." I ignored him, walking slowly toward the guard. "The wolfsbane was never meant to be found in a jar. It is already in the well." I pointed to the dark clay. "That jar is a decoy, place to be found. The real poison is on your hands, guard. You wore gloves to handle it, but a trace remains under your nails. And the scent of fear on you is not for the pack, but of being discovered. You placed it last night, didn't you? On whose orders?" The guard's eyes widened in shock, his face draining of color. He took an involuntary step back. The crowd murmured, the tide of suspicion turning on a knife's edge. "You have no proof of this fantasy." Rylan barked, stepping forward. I said, turning to face the well itself. I poured my vial of blessed water into it, but as I did, I poured my focus me intention, my newfound legacy into the act. I asked the water, the land, to reveal the truth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the water in the well's basin, visible at the top, began to shimmer. A faint, sickly greenish glow emanated from deep within its depths, a visible manifestation of the contamination. A collective gasp rose from the pack. "The well reveals the poison placed within it," I declared, my voice trembling only slightly from the effort. "And the pack can smell the guilt on him, and the fear of his master." I turned my gaze fully on Rylan, the silver light from the well reflected in my eyes. "The fracture is not in our land, Commander. It is in your heart." In that moment, under the spring sun, Rylan was exposed. Not by a warrior's challenge, but by the truth. revealed through the legacy he had tried to destroy. The game had just changed irrevocably. The silence that followed was more explosive than any roar. The sickly glow from the well water faded, but the image was seared into every witness's mind. The guard crumpled to his knees, babbling confessions that wove a damning tapestry of Ryland's instructions. Discredit the Omega. Create chaos. Position himself as the savior who would restore order after Kaelen's folly. Ryland did not crumble. He drew himself up, his face a mask of cold fury. A clever trick with herbs and light, he spat. But the conviction in his voice was hollow. The support from the crowd visibly evaporating. The scent of his ambition had curdled into something desperate and rank. You would choose this sorceress over the wolf who has bled for you for decades. Kaelen finally moved. He descended from the dais. His presence now an avalanche of unleashed authority. I choose the truth, Rylan, and the unity you have spent years secretly undermining. He stopped a few paces from his former friend. You conspired against your alpha. You sought to poison your own pack. You orchestrated the persecution of an innocent bloodline. Each charge was a hammer blow. By the old laws, your life is forfeit. Ryland's hand went to his sword. A dozen of his loyalists in the crowd mirrored the action. Steel whispering from sheaths. But 3 times as many of Kaelen's guards, and even many rank-and-file warriors who had been swayed by the public display. Moved to block them, the courtyard was a powder keg. I gave you strength, I gave you victory. Ryland screamed, his composure shattering. And you throw it all away for a myth. For a weak Omega's fairy tales. You mistake strength for brutality. And wisdom for weakness, Kaelen said. His voice lethally quiet, that is why you could never lead. Take him to the black cells. His allies will stand separate trial. There was a brief, violent scuffle. But the fight had gone out of Ryland's faction. Seeing their leaders plot unravel so completely stripped their resolve. Ryland was disarmed and dragged away. His roars of betrayal echoing off the stone walls. In the aftermath, the courtyard was a sea of stunned faces. Kaelen turned to the pack, his voice carrying the full weight of his kingship. The poison is not just in the well, it has been in our council. Fed by ambition and a lust for a kind of power that destroys packs. Today it is purged. This Omega Elara of the Lunacine line has not brought witchcraft, she has brought clarity. She has helped us see our own sickness from this day. Her voice on matters of pack spirit and unity will hold weight equal to my own on matters of law and defense. The decree was staggering, equal weight. It was an elevation beyond anything I could have imagined. I didn't feel triumphant, I felt exhausted. And profoundly sad for the friendship Kaelen had lost. For the trust that had been broken. As the crowd began to disperse, you whispering in odd tones. Kaelen approached me. The well, I asked quietly. Being purified now, the water source was already secured. Ryland's plot was more about spectacle than true harm. He hated what I represented so much, he feared it. Kaelen corrected, his gaze on the now empty space where Ryland had stood. Because it is a power he could never understand or control. A power that makes my strength better, but does not bow to it. He looked at Meth Storm in his eyes calmer now. But profound, you have passed through fire, Elara. And you have not been burned, you have been forged. That night for the first time, I did not dream of shadows or my mother's fearful eyes. I dreamed of the murals in the hidden chamber. But now the silver threads connecting the wolves were bright and strong. And at the center of the web stood not just an Omega, but an Alpha and an Omgathier strengths intertwined. guarding the heart and the body of the pack as one. The fracture had been exposed and in its place first true. Fragile thread of a new beginning was spun. Peace, it seemed, was a fleeting guest. With the internal cancer of Ryland's conspiracy cut out, the pack began to heal. But the external threat saw our moment of vulnerability as a prime opportunity. Within a week of Ryland's imprisonment, scouts returned with gashes and grim news, the Shadowclaw pack, our longtime rivals from the eastern mountains, were mobilizing not for raids but for war, their alpha. A brutal wolf named Gorin had apparently interpreted our internal strife as a fatal weakness. The War Council now had a different atmosphere. Elder Moira and the remaining commanders looked to Kaelen with renewed solidarity. But the faces were tight with worry. I was present not as a curiosity, but by stated right. My seat at the table felt earned. Yet the discussion was of tactics and numbers, a language of force I still did not speak. They outnumber our border guards 3-1. Reported a grizzled commander. Gorin has gathered allies from the lesser packs. Promising them spoils, he means to take the Silver Vale. The Silver Vale was our breadbasket, a fertile valley that fed the entire territory. Losing it would mean starvation by winter. The solution on the table was a full mobilization. A head-on clash of armies that would bleed both packs dry. Even if we won, Kaelen listened, his brow furrowed. A direct defense will cost us hundreds of lives. It will leave other borders exposed. There must be another way. All eyes eventually drifted to me. The expectation was a palpable weight. They didn't want a warrior. They wanted the Lunacine insight. The compass, not the sword. I thought of the scrolls. Of the principles of unity and heart. An idea, fragile and dangerous, began to form. What holds Gorin's coalition together? I asked quietly. Greed, fear of him. Promises of land, Elder Mora answered. So, it is not a true union, I said. It is a bundle of sticks tied together by Gorin's will. What if we could untie the knot? An assassination. The commander asked, leaning forward. No. That would make him a martyr and bind them tighter in revenge. I took a deep breath. We speak to the hearts of the sticks. Not the hand that holds them. The lesser packs follow Gorin because they see no other choice. Because they see us only as the distant, powerful Silverfang who ignores them until they step out of line. What if they saw another choice? Kaelin's eyes were locked on me, gleaming with dawning understanding. You propose a parley under a banner of truce. It's a trap, the grizzled commander growled. Gorin would never agree. Or he'd use it to strike at you directly. He will agree, I said, the plan crystallizing. Because his pride and his strategy demand it. He believes us weak and divided. A refusal to parley would make him look weak to his new allies. He will come to gloat, to demand our surrender. And we will not bring an army to the meeting place. We will bring a small guard, and we will bring me. The table erupted in protest. Absolutely not. You would be a hostage. It's suicide. Kaelen held up a hand, silencing them. His gaze never left mine. Explain. Gorin rules by fear and greed. I can sense the discontent in his allies. I can speak to it. Not with threats but with offers of true alliance. Of protection. Of shared prosperity under a different kind of strength. I can show them the fracture in his leadership, while you, my king, hold Gorin's attention with the negotiations of strength. I will negotiate for the loyalty of his followers. We fight the battle not on a field, but in the minds of his wolves. It was a breathtaking risk. It placed me directly in the lion's den. But it was a Lunasign's move to help unify. To expose the truth, the silence around the table was heavy. Then Kaelen nodded, a slow, decisive movement. We send the truce offer. At the full moon, at the stone crossing on the border. A council of alphas and a voice for unity. He stood, the decision made. We prepare not just for war, but for a different kind of victory. Or, he added, his voice grim, we prepare for the worst. As the council broke, he stopped me at the door. This is what you were born for, he said, his voice low. But the danger is greater than Ryland's poison. Goran is a beast, and you are the giant alpha king. I replied, meeting his worried gaze, and I am the Lunasign. We do not face him as separate tools anymore. We face him as one will. Let us show his pack what true strength looks like. The path was set, we were walking into the shadow of the claw. Not with a roar, but with a plan to disarm it from within. The true test of our fragile, newfound bond was upon us. The air at the stone crossing was thin and cold, carrying the scent of distant pines and imminent frost. The full moon hung like a watchful silver eye in the twilight sky, illuminating the ancient, flat stones that formed a natural platform between two territories. On our side, Kaelen stood like a carved monument, flanked by only 10 of his most elite guards. I stood slightly to his left and behind, a position of protection, yet visibility. Cloaked in a gray hooded robe over a simple dress. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. But my breathing was steady, a technique from the scrolls. From the eastern tree line, they emerged, Goran. The alpha of the Shadow Claw was a mountain of scarred muscle and matted fur. His eyes 2 chips of obsidian. He brought 20 of his warriors, hulking brutes who spread out in a semicircle. Their aggression a visible haze in the air. But my focus wasn't on them. It was on the 3 other alphas who stood slightly apart from Goran's inner circle, the leaders of the lesser packs he had coerced into his alliance. The Pine Track Pack, the River Fang, the High Crag. I reached out with my senses. The pendant a warm focus point against my skin, from Goran. I felt only a roaring, greedy hunger for land and a cruel enjoyment of dominance. But from the lesser alphas, there it was. A thread of resentment, a undercurrent of fear, not of us. But of him, the Pine Track alpha wiry man named Tarn. Smelled of anxiety and trapped desperation. His pack was small, his lands poor. He had joined not for spoils, but because refusing Goran meant annihilation. Goran's voice was a grating avalanche of sound, Kaelen. You come with so few, wise, it makes the surrender quicker. Kaelen didn't flinch, I come to talk, Goran. Not to surrender, war benefits no pack. It only leaves widows and empty valleys. Spoken like a weakling king who cowers behind an Omega's skirts. Goran sneered, his eyes flicking to me with dismissive contempt. A growl rumbled from Kaelen's guards, but he silenced them with a minute shake of his head. The strength of a pack is not in its loudest roar, but in the unity of its howl, Kaelen replied, his voice carrying with commendable power. You have gathered wolves with threats and false promises. That is not a pack, it is a prison. While they exchanged barbs, I let my awareness drifted gentle. A probing touch. I didn't target Goran, his mind was a fortress of malice. I focused on Tarn, I sent a pulse of feeling. Not words, an image of standing tall. Of green pastures shared. Of protection without subjugation. A vision of the silver veil, thriving under shared stewardship. Not conquered and stripped. Tarn's head twitched slightly. His eyes, fixed ahead on Goran's back, widened a fraction. He had felt it, a whisper of another possibility. Goran was growing impatient, Enough pretty words. Your terms are simple: cede the silver vale and its surrounding lands, and your pack may retreat to your stone den and live in service to us, or Kaelen said, stepping forward one pace, the ground itself seeming to solidify under him. You can take your wolves and return to your mountains. Your allies are free to stay and discuss true alliance with Silverfang, alliance with honor. Trade and mutual defense, not subjugation. Laughter burst from Gorin, but it was brittle. He sensed a shift, a crack in his perfect tableau of intimidation. He turned to his allies. You see. He tries to divide us with cowards' talk. It was my moment. I lowered my hood, letting the moonlight catch my silver hair. I took one step forward, into the space between the two alphas. All eyes snapped to me. My king speaks of unity, I said, my voice clear and carrying on the cold air. I looked directly at Tarn and the other two lesser alphas. But unity cannot be forced by the claw any more than a river can be held back by a hand. It must flow from a shared heart. I feel your fear. Not of Silverfang, but of the shadow at your back. I didn't point at Gorin, but my meaning was a blade. You were given a choice between a rock and a hard place. We offer you a third path, walk it with us. Gorin snarled a truly bestial sound, silence which. Your tricks won't work here. He motioned to two of his warriors, seize her. Kaelen moved at a blur of contained fury, positioning himself squarely between the warriors and me. But before a single sword could be drawn, Tarn spoke. Wait. The single word, quiet but firm, echoed in the sudden stillness. Gorin turned his murderous gaze on him. What did you say? Tarn stood straighter, the seed I had planted taking root under the nourishing light of a visible alternative. I said wait. He looked from Gorin's apoplectic face to Kaelin's imposing calm. And finally to me, the Lunacine speaks truth, I felt it. My pack joined you to survive Gorin, not to be your front line in a war of conquest. I would hear of this third path. The fracture I had sensed was now a visible fissure. The other two lesser alphas shifted uneasily, their loyalty to Gorin evaporating like mist in the newfound sun of defiance. Gorin's coalition was unraveling before his eyes, not by sword but by truth, and offered hope. Gorin's rage was a physical force, a hot, stinking wind that blew across the stones. Traitor. He roared at Tarn, spittle flying. I will gut your pack myself, you will do nothing. Kaelen declared, his voice the finality of a landslide. The parley is under truce. You break it, and you break the oldest law. Even your own warriors will hesitate. He was right. The Shadowclaw brutes looked uncertain, their aggression faltering in the face of their alpha's dishonor and the sudden shift in the balance. The scene was a taut wire, vibrating with the potential for violence. I held my breath. My senses stretched thin, feeling the emotional chaos swirling around us, Gorin's volcanic fury, Tarn's fragile Kurageth confusion of the warriors. It was Elder Moira, who had come as part of our small contingent, who played the next master stroke. She stepped forward. An old she-wolf whose authority came from decades. Not muscle, Alpha Gorin, she said, her voice dry as autumn leaves but sharp as flint. You stand exposed, you have lost this battle not on a field, but here on this stone. Your allies see you for what you are, a bully, not a leader. Will you slink back to your mountains with your tail between your legs? Or will you force a fight you can no longer win? Look at your wolves. Do they burn for a war that benefits only your pride? Her words, direct and stripped of all pretense, were a mirror held up to the situation. Gorin looked at his inner circle. The blind loyalty was gone, replaced by calculation and doubt. They had followed strength, but they were warriors. Not fools, they could see the Silverfang Kingenshaken. His offer of honorable alliance, now a real option for the defectors, which would leave Shadowclaw isolated and outmatched. Goran's chest heaved. He was cornered, and a cornered beast is most dangerous. His obsidian eyes locked not on Kaelen, but on me. I was the catalyst, the root of his unraveling. You, he breathed the word of venomous promise. Then he moved. He didn't order an attack in a shocking, desperate move. He lunged, not at Kaelen but past him. His massive clawed hand aimed for my throat, a clear, brutal violation of the truce, meant to decapitate the new hope I represented. Time seemed to slow. I saw the murderous intent in his eyes, the arc of his arm. But I was not the helpless Omega I had been at the Blood Moon gathering. My body moved with an instinct that was part training, part legacy. I dropped into a low crouch, the swipe passing over my head. At the same moment, Kaelen was there. He didn't intercept the blow, he became a wall. He caught Goran's wrist in a grip that looked like stone closing around timber. There was a sickening crack. Goran howled in pain and surprise. Kaelen used the monster's own momentum, twisting and driving him down onto the hard stone with an impact that shook the ground. He planted a knee on Goran's back, his other hand gripping the back of the Alpha's neck. A position of absolute brutal dominance, the truce. Kaelen growled, his voice the only sound in the frozen world. Is broken by your hand, your life is mine. The fight went out of the Shadowclaw warriors completely. Their Alpha, symbol of their ferocity, was pinned like a cub defeated not by an army, but by one wolf, and the strategy sparked by another. Tarn and the other lesser alphas watched, their decisions cemented. Goran, beaten, spat into the dirt. Kill me then. Get it over with. Kaelen looked up, his gaze sweeping the assembled wolves from both sides. A wise alpha once told me that strength used only for destruction is a weakness. He looked down at the defeated beast beneath him. I will not kill you, Goran, but you are broken. Your pack needs a true alpha, not a rabid dog. You will be taken, you will be held. And your beta will rule in your stead, under oath of peace and new borders. It was mercy, but it was also the most profound humiliation. Stripped of title, pack, and freedom, Goran was rendered harmless. A dead martyr could inspire Revengia living. Broken prisoner was a lesson. As Goran was dragged away by Kaelen's guards, the tension shattered, leaving a strange buzzing silence. Tarn approached Kaelen, then bowed his head. Not in total submission but in respect. The Pine Track Pack would discuss your terms, Alpha King. Kaelen nodded, releasing a long breath. The crisis had passed, the war had been averted. He turned, and his eyes found me. In them, I saw the storm finally, completely at peace. There was pride eyes, but something deeper, a gratitude that went beyond strategy. A recognition that we had together forged a new way. We had faced the claw not with a bigger claw, but with a stronger bond, and we had won. The weeks that followed the stone crossing were a whirlwind of diplomacy and rebuilding. With Goran imprisoned in the black cells next to Rylan, a fitting irony, the Shadowclaw Pack, under its new and pragmatic beta, agreed to a formal peace treaty. The borders were re-established and not shifted by conquest, but clarified with mutual agreement. More importantly, the lesser packs Pine Track, River Fang, High Crag entered into alliances with Silverfang, treaties of trade, shared hunting rights, and mutual defense were signed. The Silver Veil would be cultivated jointly, its bounty shared, making all packs stronger and eliminating the hunger that had driven so much conflict. My role evolved from a secret weapon into a public institution. A new position was created in the council, the voice of the accord. It was my duty to mediate disputes, not with the force of law, but with the wisdom of unity. To travel to allied pacts and help strengthen their internal bonds. To be a living symbol of the new way, I had a seat at the table. A voice in every major decision. And the respect of the pack was no longer born of fear or curiosity, but of genuine reverence. Kaelen and I settled into a rhythm that was both professional and profoundly personal. We spent our dawns in the West Garden, but now we spoke of plans for the future, of schools for pups from all packs, of healing the lingering distrust between factions. The space between our hands, which once held a tentative covenant, now often found itself close ties large. Calloused fingers laced with mine, a connection of solidarity, of partnership off quiet, unspoken affection that was deeper than any declaration. One evening under a sky dusted with early stars, we stood on the citadel's highest balcony, looking out over the territory now at peace. The forests were quiet, the lights of the Allied pack settlements twinkling in the distance like fallen stars. "It is done," Kaelen said, his voice a contented rumble. "The legacy is restored, not just yours, but the one my ancestors should have always protected." "It's more than restored," I replied, leaning into the solid, warm comfort of his side. "It's changed. It's not just about an Omega line anymore. It's about an idea, one that we carry together." He was silent for a long moment. "When you stood before Gorin, when you spoke, I have never known such fear or such pride." He turned to face Mehai's glacial eyes, soft in the starlight. "I claimed you before the pack to protect you. But you have protected us all. You have given me back my purpose. Not just as a king who rules, but as a wolf who leads." The air between us was charged with everything unsaid. A current of understanding that needed no labels. No grand gestures, it was in the shared dawns. The finished sentences. The silent strength we drew from one another. "The story they will tell," I mused, looking back at the peaceful lands. "Of the giant Alpha King who ignored everyone. Until the pretty Omega crossed his path," he finished at a rare, true smile touching his lips. "But they will get it wrong, you know. It wasn't your path that crossed mine. It was my entire world that shifted to orbit around you. You are my balance, Elara, my heart, my equal in all things." In that moment under the vast forgiving sky, with the work of healing begun and a future of unity stretching before us, I knew the journey of the unseen Omega was truly over. In its place stood a woman who had found her voice, her legacy, and alongside Hera King, who had found his heart. Together, they would guard not just a pack, but a new era. With the external threats quelled and the internal traitors imprisoned, a new energy hummed through the Silverfang territory. It was no longer the tense buzz of impending war, but the vibrant, determined hum of construction, not of walls, but of institutions. Kaelen and I, with the council's support, began the real work, turning the promise of the stone crossing into lasting reality. The first project was the Accord Grove. We designated a clearing in the neutral forest between the allied packs as a permanent meeting ground. Representatives from Silverfang, Shadowclaw now under Beta Harkin, Pine Track River Fang, and High Crag came together not for a tense parley, but for a shared purpose. Using the ancient designs from the Lunasign scrolls, we all worked to build a simple, open-air lodge of timber and stone. There were no thrones, only a circular arrangement of seats. Here, disputes between packs would be mediated, trade agreements forged, and cultural exchanges held. I presided over the first official gathering, A minor border, misunderstanding between pine track hunters and silverfang foresters. Using my senses to guide the conversation to the root of the issue, a misunderstanding about seasonal migration patterns, we found a solution that delighted both sides. The success was small, but its symbolism was immense. The new way worked. My days became a blend of travel and deep study. I visited each allied pack, spending time in their homes, listening to their elders, feeling the unique rhythm of their bonds. I helped a Shadowclaw beta resolve a leadership struggle by having the contenders focus on their shared love for the pack, rather than their rivalry in the high crags. I soothed anxieties about the new trade routes, assuring them their mountainous independence would be respected. The Lunacine legacy was not a remote myth, it became a living, breathing presence, a gentle hand guiding wolves back to their own best natures. Kaelen, meanwhile, revolutionized defense. Instead of a solitary Silverfang force, he instituted a joint border patrol, with warriors from each pack serving together in rotating units. It bred camaraderie and trust where there had only been suspicion. He often joined these patrols himself, no longer a distant king, but a working alpha leading by example. One afternoon, I returned from a week at River Fang to find him waiting for me in the West Garden. He looked tired but satisfied, a smudge of dirt on his cheek. "The Eastern Patrol just returned," he said. A Silverfang wolf and a former Shadowclaw brute got into a scrap over the last piece of jerky. By the time they finished their rotation, they were sharing stories about their pups. "It's working, Elara, it's actually working." The joy in his voice was my greatest reward. We walked among the herbs, and he told me of his ideas for a shared archive, where all packs could deposit their histories and knowledge. I spoke of my dream for a healing grove, where herbs and lunacine practices could be taught to those with the gift from any pack. Our visions intertwined, complementing each other perfectly. His the STURDY Chinese letter. Mine the vital spirit that animated it. The legacy was no longer something to restore and protect. It was a foundation upon which we were building something new, stronger, and more beautiful than anything that had come before. Contentment, I was learning, could make one complacent. The peace felt so deep, so hard won, that it was easy to believe the shadows had been banished forever. But poisonance introduced into a system can leave a lingering taint. The first hint was subtle. During a deep meditation in the hidden Lunacine chamber, where I often went to feel closer to my mother and the line of women before me, I felt a cold spot, not a temperature, but a spiritual emptiness, a knot of festering resentment that shouldn't have been there. It was faint, tied to the very stones of the citadel. I mentioned it to Kaelen, who increased the guard around the archives and the black cells. But we found nothing amiss. Then the whispers started. Not among the common pack members, who were thriving in the new peace, but in the darker, older corners of the court. Whispers that perhaps the king was too influenced by his Omega advisor, that the old ways of pure alpha strength were being diluted, that our alliance with former enemies made us vulnerable. The sentiments were vague, sourceless, but they spread like a mold. The breaking point came during the Harvest Moon Festival, our first great celebration since the Accords. Packs mingled freely in the citadel, laughter and music filling the air. It was a testament to our success until a Silverfang elder, a contemporary of Ryland's named Gregor, collapsed after drinking from the communal cider barrel. He didn't die thanks to the quick work of our healers, but he was violently ill and in his belongings. A note was found, crudely written: "A king ruled by his heart is a kingdom with a poisoned cup." Panic, old and familiar, threatened to surge. The shadow of the poisoned well returned. This was different, though. This wasn't a bold frame-up by a power-hungry commander. This was the work of a ghost. Someone who wished not to seize power, but to shatter the peace itself to return to a simpler, crueler world of clear enemies and unquestioned hierarchy. Kaelen's fury was cold and terrifying. A direct attack on the Festivalen, the symbol of our unity, was an attack on everything we had built. He ordered the citadel sealed. The joy of the festival curdled into fear and suspicion. The alliance felt fragile once more. I retreated to the hidden chamber. The pendant warm against my skin. A counterpoint to the chill in my heart. I had to think like a lunacine. This wasn't about finding a culprit with evidence. It was about finding a sickness in the pack's spirit. I sat on the cold floor, placed my palms on the stone where I'd felt the cold spot, and opened my senses, full of dropping every guard I had. The chamber swam around me, I felt the strong, bright bonds of the new alliances, the hopeful hearts of the pack members, but beneath it, like a hidden suerin, a current of bitter nostalgia. Of pride wounded by change-off, a love for the old. Harsh ways that viewed our compassion as contamination. It wasn't centered on one person, it was a chorus of faint, hateful whispers from a handful of hearts scattered throughout the citadel, older warriors who missed the glory of conquest, elders who felt their traditional authority waning, even a few petty nobles who resented sharing influence with lesser packs. And then I found the conductor of this bitter chorus, the source of the spiritual cold spot, not in the halls above, but below the black cells. I shot to my feet, my breath coming in gasps. It wasn't Rylan. His ambition had been hot, direct. This was colder, more patient. There was only one other prisoner who fit that description. Goran, he was broken, imprisoned, but his mind was not idle. His influence, his sheer malice, was seeping through the stone, a psychic poison affecting those already inclined to his worldview. He was weaponizing his own bitterness, whispering to the discontented hearts through the ancient ley lines of the citadel. A perversion of the connection I used for healing. I ran to find Kaelen. "It's Goran," I said, bursting into his council chamber. He's not just sitting in his cell, he's radiating. His hatred is affecting the weak-willed. Stirring up the old fears, he's the source of the whispers. The spiritual poison behind the actual poison. The elder was just a convenient tool for his sympathizers. Kaelen's face darkened with a grim understanding. A caged snake can still spit venom, he stood. Then we removed the fangs permanently. I placed a hand on his arm. Execution would make him a martyr to those he's already poisoned. We must cut the connection, not just end the life. A dangerous plan formed in my mind. One that would require every ounce of my strength and his. We would confront the shadow, not with a sword but with light. We would go to his cell, and I would perform a severing, a lunacine rite of purification to cut the malignant threads he had spun. It would risk my own spirit, but it was the only way to cleanse the sickness at its root. Descending into the black cells was like walking into the belly of a cold stone beast. The air was damp and still, heavy with despair and old violence. Kaelen walked beside me, a solid pillar of protective strength, 4 of his most spiritually strong guards behind us. We passed Ryland's cell. He glared from the shadows but said nothing. His ambition now a dull dead coal. At the end of the lowest corridor was Goran's cell. They had bound him in silver-laced chains that sapped a wolf's strength. But they couldn't chain his mind, even before we saw him. I felt it, a pulsing toxic aura of hatred and twisted pride, seeping through the iron bars like a foul gas. He sat in the corner but, as we approached, lifted his head. In the torchlight his eyes held no defeatingly, a deep, smug malice, the little witch and her tamed king, he rasped. His voice like grinding stones, come to gloat. Your peace is a house of straw. I can feel it trembling from here. You have violated the peace of mind and spirit. Kaelen's state-his voice echoing in the dank space. Your sentence is amended. Gorin laughed, a dry, crackling sound. What more can you do? Kill me? My ideas are already free. They breed in the hearts of your own. Not for long, I said, stepping forward. I held the lunacine pendant in my hand. It blazed with a pure silver light pushing back the spiritual gloom of the cell. You have used a perversion of the bond all wolves share. Today we sever your connection to it, for the first time. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. You cannot. We are the Alpha and the Lunacine, Kaelen said, placing a hand on my shoulder. His touch was a floodgate of pure, anchoring power. Together, we guard the heart and the body. Your poison ends now. I closed my eyes, ignoring Gorin's sudden snarling protests. I reached not for him, but for the silver threads that connected all wolves, the web of pack, of territory off shared existence. I found the threads attached to Gorin, but they were not the bright cords of loyalty or love. They were blackened thorny vines, and they stretched out from his cell up through the stone, seeking the receptive Edis-contented hearts above. With Kaelen's strength flowing into me river of calm. Unshakable will I did not attack the vines. I did not feed them with opposition, instead I poured pure, concentrated truth down their length. The truth of his defeat, the truth of his isolation. The truth of the thriving alliance outside his stone tomb. The truth of a strength built on unity that his philosophy could never comprehend. I sent images of the Accord Grove in use. Of joint patrols, laughing Tojdtharoff shared harvests. I sent the feeling of Tarn's relief. Of Beta Harkin's pragmatic hope. Down the thorny vines, this light traveled in the cell. Gorin began to shudder as if afflicted by a terrible chill. Stop, you cannot. He screamed, but his voice was losing its power. Above, in the citadel, I knew what was happening. Those who had been nursing his whispered poisons would feel a sudden, shocking clarity, the seductive, bitter nostalgia would be stripped away, leaving only the baragly envy or fear that underpinned it. They would see their own thoughts for what they were, echoes of a broken, hateful prisoner. The process was excruciating. I felt every ounce of Gorin's hatred, his vast, wasted potential, his bottomless spite. It was a torrent of psychic filth threatening to overwhelm me. But Kaelen's grip on my shoulder never wavered. He was my anchor, my shield. He took none of the spiritual burden, but he held me firmly in the world. A reminder of what we were protecting, with a final, silent surge of will I gathered the light and at the source. Severed not Gorin's life, but his malicious connection to the pack's psychic web. It was like cutting a rotten limb from a healthy tree. A soundless implosion of darkness echoed in the chamber. The thorny vines withered to dust in my mind's eye. Gorin slumped forward, chains clanking. He was still alive. But the malignant glow in his eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow, bewildered emptiness. The spiritual poison had been drained. I stumbled, the effort draining me utterly, but Kaelen caught me, holding me upright. It is done, he murmured into my hair. We left the black cells. As we emerged into the daylight of the upper courtyard, the very air felt different, lighter, cleaner. The lingering fear and suspicion from the festival incident had evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of relief no one could quite explain. The whispering campaign was over, its source spiritually neutered in the days that followed. The few individuals who had been susceptible to Goran's influence came forward, not with confessions of plots but with quiet apologies, vague feelings of having been not themselves. The unity of the pack solidified, stronger for having resisted this more insidious attack. That evening, Kaelen and I returned to the West Garden. The moon was a bright crescent, a symbol of growth. I felt weary to my bones, but it was a clean weariness. He will live out his days in that emptiness, Kaelen said. A fate worse than death for a wolf like him. It was the only way, I said. To kill him would have been to admit his idea had power. To silence him proves our way is stronger. He turned to me, his gaze holding a depth of emotion that needed no words. You walked into the darkest shadow and brought light. You are incredible. I leaned my head against his shoulder. I had my anchor. My king, I paused, my Kaelen. He rested his cheek against my hand. We stood in silence, watching the moon rise over our united cleansed and peaceful realm. The unseen Omega had not just been seen. She had become the beacon. The giant Alpha King no longer ruled alone. He shared the burden with his equal. And together, they had not just claimed a legacy. They had forged a new one. In the unbreakable bond between their two hearts, the end. Please subscribe for more stories. And if you'd like to give an extra boost of support to our creative team, you can also send a super thanks. It helps us continue bringing you stories like this.